Tonight we explore the mythic story of Irene, the forgotten son of Hysis, a demigod born no longer of Olympus, however of hearth and steel deep within the forge of a mortal blacksmith. His undertaking, scouse borrow the eternal flame from Mount Olympus itself to reignite the loss of life hearths of humanity. But what stood in his way became no easy quest. A three-headed father or mother of the underworld, a jealous god in winged sandals, and a storm-summoning oracle who foresaw simplest one finishing, Arian's death. So, earlier than you get too secure, take a second to just like the video and subscribe, however best in case you revel in the kind of content material that merges myth and mystery. And hi there, let us know wherein are you watching from. What time is it for you right now? Once in a while our tales are higher than sleep, and other instances they just make you dream louder. It's time now to dim the lighting. Turn on a fan for some noise, and let's cover what we've for tonight together. Inside the flickering forge of Myone, where guys formed iron with sweat and prayer, there lived a woman whose palms rivaled the gods. Her call became Callista, a mortal blacksmith with fireplace in her soul and a hammer that sang whilst it struck bronze. She built swords that might break up spears in midair and armor so seamless it changed into whispered that Ares himself once wore her breastplates into conflict. The gods observed, however most effective one descended. Histus, the lame god of the forge, the outcast of Olympus, watched her in silence. He changed into now not drawn by way of splendor. Callista became now not a woman of perfumes or palace gowns. She wore soot like battle paint and smelled of iron and pine smoke. But while she labored, Histus saw something divine in her movements, something acquainted. One night, as the moon hung low and pink over the Aegean, Haristus entered her workshop, cloaked in smoke and shadow. He presented no items, no divine decree, best his presence. The forge flared brighter that night time, and 9 months later, a baby changed into born, Arian. He did no longer cry, now not before everything. His eyes opened and glowed like coals, and the fire in the forge leapt as though spotting its family. The midwives gasped. One whispered, "He's touched by using the divine." Any other crossed herself, and the oldest amongst them muttered, "He is now not meant to live here lengthy." Arian grew quicker than other boys. At 5, he could form iron. At 7, he solid his first blade. Wonderful, sharp, and oddly warm to the touch. He in no way played. He by no means lied. There has been a stillness in him that made others uneasy. The village feared what they did not apprehend. They referred to as him cursed, the son of a god who had no throne. Youngsters avoided him. Priests refused to bless him. But Callista, she cherished him fiercely, teaching him not just to paintings with hearth, however to respect it. Flame obeys folks who listen, she'd say, now not folks that command. By the time he grew to become 16, Arian's forge burned day and night. Shaping guns for cities he'd in no way visible and kings he'd by no means meet. However, at the same time as metallic flowed below his palms, something deeper stirred within him. He wasn't made to serve. He was made to exchange the world. Long in the past, the everlasting flame were a gift stolen from the heavens, defied into lifestyles by way of Prometheus himself. It became fireplace not only for warm temperature, however for thought, art, creation. It was what set man aside from beast. But that age of defiance had dimmed. Humanity not remembered the debt it owed the gods, and the gods, in flip, had turned their backs on mankind. It began slowly. Hearths that after glowed without fail commenced to flicker out. Forests grew chillier. Storms stretched longer. Vegetation wilted in spring. And homes have been filled with the breath of frost, even in excessive summer. Kids shivered beside unlit chimneys. Antique women murmured prayers into ashes that gave no warmness. Monks stated punishment. Pupils blamed the stars. However, throughout villages, cities, and empires, an extraordinary worry took root. No longer that the sector changed into ending, however that the gods had deserted them. And they were proper. High at pinnacle Mount Olympus, the gods had sealed away the final authentic flame. A spark kept alive only in the divine brazier, untouched by way of mortal hand for hundreds of years. No god dared share it again. They feared man's rise up, feared what Prometheus had begun. They informed themselves, allow them to suffer. They must take into account their location. However, now not all gods agreed. In hidden corners of the arena, whispers stirred. Dryads said a boy born of flame. Nymphs noticed sparks dancing in a boy's eyes from Cine. The winds carried a call, Irion. Inside the bloodless chambers of Delhi, the oracle dreamed of fire, strolling on legs, lighting towns with its footsteps. And in the depths of forgotten temples, dying candles sputtered lower back to life on the sound of a blacksmith's hammer hanging in Vil. Iran had no concept. He most effective knew the iron was growing harder to form, that the flames in his forge required more breath, that the warmth that after came without problems became slipping away. However, the International had began to look at gods, both vintage and silent, had grew to become their gaze to Myone. The divine brazier at top Olympus, though shielded in marble and guarded by way of fate, flickered for the primary time in an age, responding not to a god, however to a boy born of fire and sorrow. And deep inside him, something started out to glow. Delhi became death. As soon as the center of divine council, wherein kings and warriors climbed stone paths to or trying to find Apollo's voice, now it stood quiet, its columns cracked and overgrown, its sacred springs reduced to mist, but one voice nevertheless lingered, buried deep in the mountain's breath. The oracle Irion arrived in silence. No one greeted him on the gates. The torches lining the temple had lengthy because long passed out. Ivy clung to broken altars like arms, unwilling to allow move of misplaced religion. Thunder growled inside the clouds above, now not of rain, however of something older, watching. He descended into the hollow chamber in which generations earlier than him had once wept and begged. There, seated at pinnacle a crumbling stone throne, become the oracle. She was draped in violet robes, pores and skin faded like ash, eyes blind however blazing with storms. Earlier than he should communicate, she inhaled sharply like a flame being pulled back right into a lantern. Hyan, she hissed, even though no call had been spoken. He stated not anything. You may climb the mountain. You may take the flame and you may die. Her voice cracked like a whip through the stillness. He did not recoil. He had heard stories of oracles, their riddles wrapped in poetry and metaphor. But this wasn't a prophecy, turned into a sentence. She rose slowly, limbs moving like smoke stuck in wind. The gods will oppose you. The world will call for your failure. The flame what you searching for. It does no longer belong to mortals. It becomes stolen once, and the rate turned into eternity in chains. Irion advanced, fists clenched. So let me pay the charge. An extended silence followed. Then laughter, now not merciless however tired. The sound of a person who had visible too many stories give up the same way. You already are, she whispered. The room grew darkish. The thunder outside crescendoed. The air pulsed with something old, something primal. Scaped, her prophecy became achieved. And though Arion left without another phrase, her vision accompanied him. In desires, in flame, in each shadow solid by his forge. The gods had spoken. His path turned into set. However, not even Olympus should expect what a death world would do while handed returned its fire. Before one could ascend Olympus, one needed to earn the mountain's reputation. And Olympus never bowed to the untested. Legends whispered that the bottom of the mountain become no longer stone or snow, but soul. That below its basis was a gate sealed by way of silence and guarded through the oldest fear in creation, Cerberus, the hound of Hades. No one could skip that gate without first touching death. Arion did now not query it. He had studied myths the manner blacksmiths observe warmness, carefully, wearily. He knew what waited under the roots of Olympus. But to attain the eternal flame, he would have to descend, not metaphorically, but into the very underworld itself. So he organized now not with armor, but with craft. He spent 3 days and 3 nights forging a collar, no longer for battle, but for submission. It became made from obsidian, iron, and the final ember from his mom's forge. Into it he carved 3 names, one for each of Kberis' heads. He whispered them aloud as he labored. Memory, loyalty, grief. On the 4th day, he stood earlier than the shadowed mouth of a cave stated to lead downward for all time. The wind right here become cold, but it did not sting the skin. It scraped the soul, and the air smelled no longer of rot, however of forgotten prayers. He entered deeper and deeper. He walked beyond bones that glowed faintly inside the dark, past torches that lit themselves without flame till he heard it. The respiratory, sluggish, large, layered, like 3 storms dreaming in unison. Kberis. He stepped into the clearing and located the beast drowsing on a bed of ash and bone, each head twitching in a different rhythm. His fur changed into blacker than absence. Its eyes had been closed, however its ears twitched. Arian did now not draw a weapon. He approached, knelt and held out the collar. Then softly he began to hum. It was the tune his mother had sung to him as a child. The one she sang when nighttime made the world sense too big, too merciless. The middle head stirred. The left opened one amber eye. The right tousled, then stopped. They listened, and in that silence Arian slipped the collar on. Kberis exhaled, and the door behind him opened, now not with rage, however with respect. Arian had touched death, and death had stepped apart. The street up Olympus changed into no road in any respect. There have been no markers, no stars to manual the manner, simplest sheer rock, biting wind, and whispers that echoed from nowhere. Arian climbed now not with truth, however with intuition. His mortal hands bled. His divine blood burned. The mountain resisted him at each flip. And then he regarded, not with a roar, now not in a flash of energy, however in silence. Hermes, the trickster, the messenger, the thief. He stood on a ledge in advance, dressed like a traveler, cloak loose, sandals laced with feathers, eyes sharp as broken glass. A crooked grin danced across his lips. "Properly," he said, spinning a coin between his palms. "I notion you would be taller." Arian did not prevent climbing. "I realize why you are here," Hermes persisted, walking casually beside him without ever lifting a foot. "You want to bring fireplace back to the mortals? Sweet, noble, stupid." Arian paused. "Then prevent me." Hermes chuckled. "Forestall you? Oh no. No, I'm now not here to combat you. I am right here to ensure you apprehend the deal. You are on foot into the coronary heart of Olympus, into the god's vault, into a story that isn't always yours to inform. And but, Arian replied, "Right here I'm." That smile dwindled barely. "You're looking to restore a balance that become damaged for a cause," Hermes stated. The flame changed into a present once, a mistake, and now the gods guard it like a dragon protects gold. No longer because it's valuable, however, because it's risky. Arian stared at him. Then they've forgotten what risk looks as if. For the primary time, Hermes's expression soured. The air around them shifted. The coin in his hand vanished. His wings twitched. "You believe you studied your Prometheus," he stated, voice bloodless. "But you are now not even a flicker as compared to him." "I am now not trying to be him," Arian responded. "I'm attempting to finish what he began." Hermes advanced, pressed fingers to Arian's chest. "Then here's my present." Exurged. It wasn't physical. It was deeper. A thread inside him twisted, turned. "The fire you seek," Hermes whispered, "will burn the entirety you are." Then he vanished. The mountain groaned. Thunder rolled. A storm had all started. Not of rain, however of result. And Arian climbed better, cursed, however unshaken. The curse settled into Arian's chest like frost inside the lungs. At the beginning, it changed into diffused, a tightening when he breathed, a dull warmness under his skin. However, the higher he climbed, the greater it bit into him, not like a wound, more like erosion. Piece via piece, the man changed into being scraped away, leaving something raw behind. Mount Olympus became not only a mountain, it became alive. Its cliffs shifted underneath his toes. Wind screamed down ravines like historic voices. furious to be disturbed. The higher he rose, the less mortal the world became. Timber stopped growing. Birds stopped singing. Even the celebrities above seemed to pull lower back. There have been no paths, handiest jagged ledges and sheer faces that demanded sacrifice with every step. Irian bled. He slipped. As soon as he nearly fell to his dying. However, an unexpected flash of heat from within his chest steadied him. It was as though the flame Hermes mentioned, the one that might burn him, had all started to awaken. However, he stored climbing because whenever he faltered the idea of the demise hearths, the cold villages, the kids huddled in darkness. The idea of his mother, palms blistered, still forging warm temperature for a world forgetting what warm temperature supposed. And nonetheless Olympus supplied no mercy. Hurricane clouds gathered above. Lightning danced alongside the ridge like gods pacing in frustration. He ought to feel their eyes now, looking, judging, anticipating him to fall. However, it wasn't just the mountain fighting him. It changed into Olympus itself. He handed historic ruins carved into the stone. Temples lengthy deserted via faith. Their altars cracked, their gods forgotten. Statues of Athena with eyes chipped out, columns of Zeus split by way of time and silence. Irian realized something no person else had dared to say aloud. The gods were not powerful anymore. They were afraid. Afraid that a mortal may deliver the hearth lower back without their permission. That a person now not born of their halls would possibly convey the mild that when defined Olympus. And in that fear they threw their worst at him. Ice, thunder, visions, voices. But he climbed. With arms torn and heart smoldering, he rose above the clouds. And in the distance, lit not through solar however by divine flame, he noticed it. The brazier burning, waiting. It was no longer what he expected. The summit of Olympus wasn't carved in marble or guarded by using gods clad in gold. There had been no trumpets, no gates, no thunderclaps of divine welcome. There has been handiest silence and the flame. It stood within the center of a windless clearing on a pedestal of blackened stone. The brazier looked historic, older than language itself, fashioned by way of palms now not remembered. And inside it danced the everlasting flame, no longer purple, no longer orange, however white, pure, blinding, alive. It did no longer flicker. It watched. Arion stepped nearer. The warmth failed to sear him. It entered him as if recognizing something long misplaced. His breath caught, his pores and skin prickled. That ember Hermes had cursed into his coronary heart now pulsed like a second heartbeat, calling to the flame like a lost sibling. He reached out. In that moment, time faltered. He saw towns constructed from firelight. He noticed his mother's forge blazing inside the dead of wintry weather. He noticed civilizations rising and falling, each one built around hearth, and every one forgetting why it burned. He also saw the punishment. Prometheus, chained to stone, his liver eaten each day with the aid of a vulture. The gods had called it justice. However, Arion saw it for what it was.
Vorhi sporting a crown.
He could turn again. He could let humanity adapt to the bloodless. Neglect hearth. Neglect him. But then he heard the wind whisper her name, Callista, and he remembered who he was. He grabbed the flame and it took him. It screamed via his frame, now not like burning, like being rewritten. Bones cracked and reformed. His skin glowed, veins pulsing with light. He fell to his knees, roaring soundlessly because the flame poured into each part of him, erasing the boy, forging the fire-bearer. He wasn't preserving it anymore. He was it. The brazier flickered, then dimmed, then went bloodless. Due to the fact the eternal flame was not chained to Olympus, it had chosen a brand new vessel. Irian collapsed beside the empty pedestal. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like sunrise. He breathed slightly, but with every breath, a wisp of heat spread outward into the wind, down the mountain, closer to the world beneath. He had taken the hearth, but now not for himself, for anybody. Arion did now not stroll down Olympus. He carried it with him. The instant the flame entered him, the mountain stopped resisting. Winds fell silent. The sky cleared. Even the stone under his FT regarded to shift and manual him, not with reverence, however with recognition. He become now not a trespasser. He became a torch. His frame smoldered with divine warmness. Now not the type that scorched, however the kind that stirred existence. Wherever his foot touched earth, frost melted. With every breath, the cursed wind softened. The air smelled no longer of smoke, however of renewal, of rebirth. But he was no longer whole. His limbs trembled under the load of what he carried. The eternal flame turned into now not simply fire. It became reminiscence. He should experience every spark it had ever ignited. The first campfire in a prehistoric cave, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy, and he felt the cost of all of it. He noticed the cities burned in its name, the temples razed, the wars fought with stolen hearth and ambition. The gift of the gods had in no way been harmless. But this time he could now not supply it as a weapon. He descended through cloud and silence, beyond broken statues of gods who had once been worshipped, now crumbling in divine decay. He passed the cave wherein Cerberus had once guarded the gate, but the beast changed into gone. As though even death had stepped aside for what Arion had become, he reached the arena beneath. And there, in a frozen village wherein hearths had long turned to ash, humans accumulated around him, no longer in worry, however in awe. He did not talk. He simply held out his hand, and a flame danced from his fingertips into the closest hearth. It roared to existence, then every other and every other. A refrain of heat unfolded from home to home, town to metropolis, across lands that had forgotten what it felt like to accumulate around a hearth without praying first. Arion burned. His hair shimmered like molten gold. His skin cracked like cooled obsidian. He was demise, however not fading. He was turning into something else. He had not stolen the flame. He had emerged as it. And everywhere it burned, the world whispered his name. Not in worship, but in gratitude. No tomb become ever constructed for Arion. No statue turned into carved. No songs had been sung in temples. There was no procession, no mourning, no final struggle to mark his passing. And yet, he never disappeared. After the fires again, strange matters started to occur across the land. In distant villages in which no tourist had handed, hearths lit on their own. Entire forests, once frozen strong, blossomed in a single day. Blacksmiths claimed their forges heated faster. Kids, huddled in the cold, informed their parents they saw a man of light standing beside the flame before it rose. No person may want to show whatever. However, all of them advised the equal tale. He walked until there was nothing left of him to walk with. His frame had long due to the fact that cracked and burned, now not from weak point, however from transformation. What remained of Arion, bone, blood, voice, had grown to be spark, smoke, heat, and he gave it all away. His mom's forge was the closing place touched, vintage, abandoned, its fires bloodless for many years, till one night time a traveler passing through claimed he saw a boy hammering something sparkling white on the anvil. When he looked once more, the forge became empty, but the flame danced high and warm, just like it used to. They are saying the gods felt it. That Olympus, sensing it had been stripped of its power, trembled in its silence. However, the gods did now not strike lower back. They did no longer rage. Due to the fact even they understood, Arion had now not challenged them with struggle or satisfaction. He had reminded them of motive, and so the everlasting flame, once hoarded through immortals, now flickered in each village, every town, every lonely mountain hut. It lived within the warmth of soup shared by strangers, in candles located by means of grieving arms, in torches lifted by rebels searching for mild inside the darkest places. And usually, constantly, they whispered the equal call. Arion. Some say whilst your fireplace dims for no reason, it is him passing through. Others say if you pay attention closely to the crackle of the flame, you may hear the rhythm of a hammer placing an anvil. Regular, patient, everlasting. Because Arion by no means died. He have become warmth itself. No longer a god, Now not a hero, only a boy who gave up everything to assist the world bear in mind how to glow again. Within the land of Sparta, wherein boys have been taught to combat earlier than they might speak, and honor became carved in bone, girls were no much less fierce. Among them became one whose call echoed through the marble halls just like the conflict of steel. Leonthe, daughter of Commander Adrastos. She turned into born at some stage in a blood-purple eclipse as omens howled over the city. Midwives whispered that she got here from Ari himself. By using age 12, she had bested her brothers inside the wrestling ring. With the aid of 16, she had led a hunting birthday celebration into the Titus Mountains and lower back with 3 wild boars tied in the back of her chariot. Leonthe become now not simply respected. She become feared. She walked through the Spartan agora with immediately spine and quiet steps. Men diminished their eyes. Girls watched her with an unusual blend of envy and awe. She not often spoke except spoken to, and her phrases had been selected like arrows, in no way wasted. But there has been something in her that few observed. While she removed her armor at night time, when the torches dimmed and the arena outdoor fell away, Leonthe might stare on the stars, not with a warrior's challenge, but with surprise. There has been a softness buried in her, one which struggle couldn't scorch, a craving no longer for marriage, no longer for conquest, but for something else, something the Spartan code had no call for. Peace, magic, thriller. She in no way stated. What she knew turned into this. Each full moon while the city slowed and the soldiers slept, her body pulled her towards the cliffs above the river Eurytus. She would go away at the back of her spear, her cuirass, her recognition, and turn out to be just a girl wandering below the celebs on my own. The sector, she thought, ought to be bigger than Sparta, larger than swords and pride. She felt it in her blood, like tracks she could not hear, however knew was playing somewhere. And then one night time, below a sky so silver it seemed scraped from the brink of a blade, she saw it gliding across a nevertheless pool in a hidden grove. A swan, unmoving, looking her, moonlight rippling on its again, beautiful in a way no warong had ever been. And from that moment on, Leonthe's life commenced to shift far away from blood and struggle towards something softer, stranger, and a ways more risky. The grove changed into hidden, untouched by the standard grit of Spartan boots. Nestled among 2 cliffs, it whispered of something older than Sparta, older even than Olympus. The timber curved in crescent arches, their branches low and silvered with the aid of moonlight. A shallow lake lay on the middle, nevertheless as glass, and on it the swan. Its feathers shimmered like woven starlight, neither white nor gray, however something in among. It floated with the silence of smoke, slicing throughout the water and not using a ripple. Its long neck arched gracefully as though sculpted by divine palms, and its eyes, God's its eyes, held no animal wildness, no worry, only consciousness. Leonthe iced up on the Trian. Her training screamed warning. Nothing in nature moved like this. No creature stood so boldly before a human. But the swan did not flee. It watched her calmly, confidently. She progressed, tilted its head. Another step closer. The lake did not stir. She stood at the threshold of the water, heartbeat constant but alert, hand resting gently on the dagger strapped to her thigh. The swan moved once more, slowly, intentionally, toward her. When it reached the edge of the shallows, it stopped and bowed its head barely. Leonthe knelt. She had seen lots of things in her existence. War camps burning, bloodied warriors screaming on the heavens, newborn calves gasping for his or her first breath. However, by no means had she visible something so quiet, so nevertheless, so enchanted. She reached out. The swan did no longer withstand. Her fingertips brushed its feathers. Heat, unnaturally heat, as although its body burned with sunlight as opposed to blood. A sense stirred in her chest. No longer fear, not fascination. Something older. Something she didn't recognize she'd been lacking till that very second. Connection. The swan blinked as soon as and grew to become away, gliding back into the center of the lake. Leonth remained kneeling, looking it, unsure what had simply began, however certain it changed into no accident. The next full moon she again. So did the swan. And again the next month and the subsequent. No words, no guarantees, just presence. A ritual born of silence and gravity. By the point autumn settled at the hills, Leonthai no longer puzzled why. She simply knew the swan could be waiting, and her global would in no way be the identical. Seasons grew to become. Leaves reined, fell, and grew again. The wars persevered far beneath the hills. However, in that moonlit grove, time stood still. Best the full moons mattered now. Best those nights. Leonthai had as soon as measured her well-worth in warfare scars, victories, and commands observed without hesitation. But now, something softer guided her, something a ways older than Spartan law. Every month she returned to the grove with services, sparkling figs, soft linens, carved trinkets from olive wood. The swan by no means ate, never mentioned the gifts. Yet Leonthai continued, drawn by way of an intuition she could not give an explanation for. The swan became continually ready. It met her at the threshold of the water, dipped its head lightly, then glided by means of her side. Every so often it turned around her. Every so often it without a doubt stood beside her at the shore, its warm temperature bleeding into the air round it like a hidden sun. She began to speak, not like a soldier, but like a woman who had by no means been heard earlier then. She noted her father's coldness, of the way victory never stuffed the empty space in her chest, of the nights she stared at the sky, thinking if there has been more than sword and soil. The swan said not anything, but it listened. She should experience it. The stillness wasn't silence. It became interest, the sort mortals in no way gave, the kind no commander, no suitor, no friend had ever presented her. Through the years she stopped feeling alone. She braided her hair before each go-to, smoothed her gowns, sat beside the swan for hours, shoulder touching wing, saying little, but feeling more than she'd ever felt in a Spartan palace or battlefield. And nonetheless, the swan by no means fled, in no way elderly, in no way changed. She must have been afraid. There have been testimonies of gods taking animal form to trap mortals into wreck. Tales of punishments for folks that cherished the divine. But Leonthai did not trust in memories anymore. She believed inside the way her hand in shape flawlessly along the curve of the swan's neck. In the way it bowed its head when she sang quietly into the night. In the way it seemed to look ahead to her, want her.
No phrases, no guarantees.
But in their silence, something historic took root. And though she did not communicate the phrase, now not even to herself, Leonthai knew what it changed into. Love. The swan changed into not born of earth. Its wings had as soon as stretched throughout the sky. Its arms had played the lyre that made the sun upward push. Its call had once been whispered in temples, carved in marble, and shouted in song. Apollo, god of light, of music, of prophecy, now silent, feathered, bound. Long before Leonthai turned into born, Apollo had devoted a sin inside the eyes of Olympus. He had defied Zeus, not with blade or rebellion, however with fact. He had spoken in opposition to his father's punishments, towards the cruelty passed down from throne to international, against the silence demanded by means of strength. For this Zeus did no longer kill him. He unmade him, a spell cast in fury, greater cursed than justice. Apollo becomes stripped of his shape, his voice, his divinity pressured into the body of a swan. No longer to teach him humility, but to remind him he may want to glow just like the sun and nevertheless be caged by shadow. The curse turned into cruer nevertheless. There was one situation. If a mortal ever located his authentic identity, the transformation might end up permanent. And so Apollo waited years, centuries, lifetimes, floating on lakes, hiding underneath stars, watching mortals forget his temples, overlook his hymns, watching the sector develop chillier because the gods withdrew. Till Leonthai, her presence cracked something interior him, something buried so deep even Olympus had forgotten it existed. Wish. He in no way meant to be visible, never intended to live. But she lower back again and again. And her voice, Her voice, whilst she spoke to him within the glade, changed into the handiest element that made the hearth inner him flicker once more. She turned into now not a priestess, now not a nymph, now not a delegated oracle. She changed into a warrior with fingers that knew best weapons, a lady hardened by loss and trained to feel nothing. And yet she noticed him. She dealt with him no longer as an image or a hazard, but as something sacred, something really worth looking forward to. He dared no longer communicate, dared not screen his call. But within the tilt of his head, within the stillness of his frame, he spoke back each query she in no way requested. And slowly, impossibly, he cherished her back. In Sparta, solitude changed into respected, but now not for too long. Leonthi's absence did now not pass left out. Each complete moon, she slipped far from the barracks, from the training fields, from the watchful eyes of commanders and relatives. In the beginning, none questioned her. She became Leonthi, untouchable, unshakable, the warrior whose loyalty changed into carved into each scar. But Sparta thrived on order, on discipline, and love, particularly the hidden type, was an overseas element in a metropolis built on manipulate. Whispers commenced. She wanders. She speaks less in counsel. She trains, but her moves lack venom. It was real. Leonthia had changed. Her moves were nonetheless sharp, but not cruel. Her voice not reduced, and something in her eyes softened. Some nights she smiled to herself as though maintaining a secret the gods themselves couldn't thieve. Her father observed first. Commander Adrastos, a man whose face bore no softness, whose daughters were meant to guide men, now not follow feelings. He summoned her one nighttime underneath the guise of method. But when the chamber emptied, he spoke. It seems that, "What maintains you from sleep?" Leonthi presented no solution. His voice darkened. "Recollect who you are." However, she already had, as a minimum, the version of herself that Sparta had molded. What the city had built in stone, the swan had touched with water, and Leonti discovered herself unwilling to return to who she'd been. Still, Sparta watched. A patrol as soon as followed her out beyond the partitions, tracing her steps towards the cliffs. They lost her close to the olive groves. She became too skilled to be shadowed, but it became sufficient. Sufficient to birth suspicion. Clergymen murmured approximately omens, that the moonlight carried voices, that the lakes past Sparta stirred unnaturally, a warrior lady disappearing every full moon. They feared it turned into insanity or worse, a god. Leonthi knew the partitions had been final in, that eyes had been mastering to appearance where earlier than that they had appeared away, that her silence, once power, now made her vulnerable. But still she went, still she determined him. And in that grove where moonlight touched feather, she forgot the noise of Sparta, forgot the guidelines, forgot the risk. Handiest one element mattered now, no longer being visible. Due to the fact if the sector discovered what she knew in her heart, it would destroy them each. The moon became heavy that night time, low, swollen, golden as a dying flame. Leonth stood in her chamber, fingers trembling over her armor, not able to lock the very last clasp. Something had changed. She had felt it for days. A quiet trembling below her feet, like the floor itself knew what she did not. The swan have been different on their closing meeting, restless, greater watchful. Its feathers bristled whilst the wind shifted. It had rotated her twice earlier than settling at her side, its warmth sharp in place of soothing. That night time, sleep eluded her, and whilst it got here, it added visions. She stood in a silver grove, her palms blanketed in gold dust. A statue loomed before her, element guy, part swan, its wings frozen mid-beat, its face serene and lifeless. She reached out, called a call she did not know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked and a voice echoed, not from the sky, but from inner her bones. Fact will freeze what love has kindled. She woke up breathless, heart racing, the name still burning on her tongue. She attempted to brush aside it, a dream, nothing greater. However, warriors recognize whilst fear is actual. And this was no everyday omen. This become prophecy. Day after today, Leonti left Sparta in advance than traditional. the pain in her chest sharper with every step. She failed to comply with her normal direction. Her FT led her deeper into the hills, via trees she'd in no way exceeded, into groves untouched by using reminiscence. There, hidden below a curtain of ivy and moss, she found the altar, historic, cracked, marked with a single unmistakable inscription, carved in old flaking gold. Apollon, her breath hitched. All of a sudden, the pieces fell into vicinity. The warm temperature of the swan, its listening gaze, the goals, the curse in her bones, the purpose it had constantly come in the course of the entire moon. He wasn't simply enchanted. He'd become a god. Her god, and he or she had damaged something. She stumbled again, the sound of feathers behind her. The swan had observed her, silent as always, but its stillness not comforted her. It was watching unfortunately, softly, as though it already knew, as though the truth had arrived, and so had to give up. The grove was now not still. The air pulsed sluggish and deep, just like the breath of something historical stirring in its sleep. Moonlight trembled on the surface of the lake. The trees leaned in, silent witnesses to the unraveling of a secret that had survived centuries. Leonthi stood frozen earlier than the altar. The name Apollo nonetheless echoed in her thoughts like a spear putting stone. She became slowly as if doing so might unmake the truth. But it became too late. The swan turned into there, now not gliding, now not graceful, simply status, looking. Its feathers no longer shimmered. Its glow dimmed, flickering like a loss of life flame. Leonthi stepped in the direction of it, her lips parted, unsure what to say, unsure if anything might be stated. "I know," she whispered. The wind stilled. An unmarried feather drifted from the swan's returned, falling slowly, silently before vanishing into dust the moment it touched the altar. And then the exchange commenced. The swan's neck arched, no longer in grace, but in discomfort. His frame trembled. Feathers unraveled into streams of gold and light. Wings bent into arms. Webbed FT split into toes that dug into the earth, and in which the swan had stood. Now knelt a man, bare, radiant, damaged, Apollo. His hair shimmered just like the sky at sunrise. His skin glowed faintly, like embers below marble. But his eyes were dimmed with the aid of sorrow, by inevitability. Leonthi stepped lower back, hand to her mouth. She had loved him in silence, and now silence had emerged as insufferable. He tried to speak, however the curse had now not absolutely lifted. His voice cracked like thunder in a storm too old to call. "You were not supposed to realize," he stated at final, voice slightly extra than wind. It was the only rule. She fell to her knees beside him, tears slicing down her warrior's face like rivers via mountain stone. "I failed to suggest to," she whispered. He smiled then simply as soon as, a god's smile, no longer of joy, but of farewell. "I recognize." And with that, the floor under them shuddered. A soundless quake. A divine sentence handed without mercy. His glow diminished, his skin hardened, his limbs stiffened mid-attain. Apollo became turning to stone, and Leonthi could simplest watch as love have become legend. The instant the name became spoken, the curse started its very last paintings. Apollo's body, as soon as fluid with divinity, now stiffened inch by using inch. The mild underneath his pores and skin dulled like cooling steel. His golden hair lost its luster, hardening into marble threads as the very last segment of Zeus's punishment took keep. There could be no forgiveness, no reprieve. Leonthi grasped his palms, still warm, nevertheless trembling. However she may want to experience it, the stone creeping like frost over flesh. His arms curled around hers one ultimate time earlier than they stopped moving altogether. She shook her head. No, this may be how it ends. But the curse failed to pay attention. It had waited centuries in silence, affected person and merciless. Apollo's chest rose once more and then did not. His wings half-formed behind his shoulders froze mid-fold. His knees bent in grief, locked in region. His face, still stunning, nonetheless kind, became stuck among love and ache. His eyes open but unseeing. after which silence, a quiet deeper than any battlefield, deeper than the moments before the charge. This become not the silence of peace, however of loss, of something sacred shattered. Leonthe knelt there, forehead pressed to his now bloodless hand, a hand that once cradled stars, now not anything more than stone. Her tears slid down the facet of his marble fingers and fell to the earth, one after any other, sluggish and steady as a funeral march. The grove dimmed. Even the moon, so often vivid and watchful, regarded to pull away in the back of a veil of cloud. No lightning got here. No god regarded because the punishment became performed. Zeus had spoken. The swan had flown for the closing time. And Apollo, god of light, was now a statue of silence, for all time frozen in the second of his very last reality. Leonthe stayed lengthy after the transformation finished, hands wrapped around what remained. She did no longer scream. She did no longer curse the heavens. There had been no Spartans to listen her cries, no warriors to endure witness, only the wind, most effective the timber, and the stone determine of a god who had once loved her, now not with thunder and fireplace, however with stillness, and now with silence. Lethe never back to Sparta. She left her armor where it lay beside the altar, eliminated her sword, allow her war-bound name waft away like smoke over the lake. The girl who had as soon as stood tall among kings now knelt in silence beside a statue that would in no way move once more. The grove became her international. Every complete moon she back, in no way missing a single one. She delivered no services, no incense, no prayers, just herself and a reminiscence. She would sit down beside the statue of Apollo, fingers brushing the cold stone hand she as soon as held in flesh. On occasion she spoke. On occasion she hummed a track he'd in no way heard, however by some means felt find it irresistible belonged to both of them. Different instances she really watched the water and stated not anything. The villagers commenced to whisper. They stated a woman haunted the hills, that she wandered underneath moonlight with eyes like distant stars. A few stated she had long gone mad. Others said she were selected. However, no one dared disturb her. Years handed. Winters got here and went. Empires shifted. Gods fell silent. However, Leonthe remained. She grew older, however by no means frail. Her energy persisted, less like a soldier, more just like the roots of an olive tree clinging to the same patch of earth 12 months after year, storm after storm. And still the statue stood. Apollo mid-kneel, wings half-formed at the back of him, gaze fixed on the gap where Leonthe continually sat, a moment frozen in marble, untouched by using time. Some vacationers claimed the stone was warm to touch, that in case you positioned your hand in opposition to his chest, you could experience something faint, like a heartbeat from a dream. And then, one final complete moon, Leonthe got here. She sat beside him longer than usual, laid her head gently on his shoulder, and by no means moved again. Whilst the villagers came weeks later, they observed her there, peaceful, eyes closed, lips curled faintly in a smile. Beside her, Apollo's statue shimmered faintly as though lit from inside. Nobody touched it. They constructed no shrine, no temple. However, the legend grew, and now when the moon is full and the wind continues to be, a few say the swan returns to the lake. Not to be seen, but to consider. Milanian was no longer born beneath a palace roof or amidst temple incense. He came into the world underneath a willow tree at some stage in a storm that split the sky in. His mom, a midwife's daughter, swaddled him in a linen wrap as thunder rolled over the hills. Birds scattered, the rain danced, and the child did no longer cry. He hummed from the moment he could stroll. Tune followed him. Streams whispered melodies whilst he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he exceeded. He failed to need education. Sound belonged to him. With the aid of 10, he could mimic any bird call and weave it into track. By way of 16, he performed the lyre with such grace that even hardened warriors paused to listen. He sang of rivers, of lost brothers, of fields before struggle, songs that stuffed guys' eyes with tears they failed to recognize they had. People known as him a present, a miracle, a child of divine breath. He never claimed it. Melanian traveled from village to village, sharing his song without coin or pleasure. His voice calmed fevers. His chords softened hardened hearts. He once played for a dying toddler who, upon listening to his lullaby, smiled and drifted into dying as if it had been a dream. However, not all ears that listened were mortal. One spring night, as he sat beside a glimmering river and strummed a song approximately starlight, the very air round him modified. The wind slowed, the water stilled, even the frogs silenced their tune. And then they arrived, the Muses, 9 of them, stepping gently from at the back of the veil of the sector, cloaked in mild and sound. Each carried her own essence. History, tragedy, dance, epic poetry, and extra. Their eyes have been no longer kind, not cruel, just understanding. They listened, and then, to Melanian's astonishment, they sang lower back. 9 voices in ideal harmony, older than language. Melanian closed his eyes, and without idea joined them. His voice failed to echo theirs. It developed them. Whilst the last word fell into silence, even the celebrities seemed closer. One of the Muses, Kali, eldest and maximum stern, touched his brow. "You are not everyday," she said. "You're a vessel." And hence started the legend of Melanian, the bard whose voice could shake the heavens. From that night on, Melanian changed into not only a talented mortal. He turned into touched, marked, whispered about. The Muses had selected him. Within the quiet folds of Mount Hell, in which few dared to tread, they invited him into their sacred circle. There, beneath historic trees and skies unclouded through mortal ambition, Melanian discovered no longer via lectures, but via revel-in. Kali, muse of epic, taught him how to bend a story into sound. Cleo whispered the histories of countries into his ears as he slept. Terpsira danced barefoot via leaves at the same time as he performed beside her, his fingers gaining knowledge of the rhythm of wind and body. Ute laid her flute across his palm and stated handiest, "Listen," and he did. He absorbed now not just melodies, but truths, the type that lived between words, the sort that mortals hardly ever observed however felt. In the hush before a hurricane, within the pain of longing, in the gasp of a child at the start snowstorm, the Muses gave him now not electricity but angle, and they requested for handiest one aspect in Go Back. Sing for them, the meaning mortals, the lost, the weary, the proud and broken, folks that needed to take into account that splendor nevertheless existed even in suffering. That track will be each balm and blade. Before everything, Melanian obeyed. He finished in city boards and quiet fields, performed before kings and beggars alike. His songs stitched broken hearts, stirred revolutions, mended fathers to daughters, and enemies to uneasy peace. But as his present grew, so did something else. Ambition. He started out chasing sounds the Muses hadn't taught, notes no god had touched. Within the stillest elements of the night, he could write alone, drafting fragments of something beyond language. A track that might bend time, still the wind, and bring tears to stone. A final song. He informed no one, no longer even the Muses, due to the fact some part of him now not wanted to percentage the divine. He desired to surpass it, and the Muses, ever watchful, noticed the change, no longer in his palms, however in his eyes, the way he seemed beyond them, as if destiny owed him extra than admiration. And in the distance, destiny stirred barely. Because no mortal walks beside the divine for all time without price, Melanian withdrew from the world. He left behind the applause, the requests, the gifts from kings, and the adoration of towns. He stopped performing in public, stopped coaching students, even stopped speaking to the Muses. A few claimed he had fallen unwell. Others stated he had died. But in truth, he had long passed to the shadowed slopes of Mount Helicon, deeper than any mortal had ever long gone, where most effective echoes of the antique gods stirred. There, in a cave lined with crystals that sang while touched by mild, he began composing the very last music. Came to him in pieces, sometimes in sleep, on occasion in thunder. every now and then in silence so deep it apprehensive him. He did not write it. He determined it like a mystery hidden between the folds of truth. The melody refused to stay nevertheless. It modified whilst he breathed, twisted with his heartbeat. It became no longer a song for performance. It was truth in sound. He heard the delivery of stars in its starting observe. He felt the deaths of empires in its fall. It became not unhappy. It became no longer completely satisfied. Clearly changed into. He labored for months, maybe years. Time bent unusually inside the cave. He ate little, slept best while the track allowed it. He might weep one moment, chortle the subsequent, as even though the track performed through his soul as opposed to his arms. And while it turned into completed, the sector modified. Birds stopped mid-flight. Bushes leaned closer to the windless mountain. Streams went quiet. The sky itself held its breath. And a ways above, within the marble chambers of Olympus, the gods became their heads. Even the fates, who never appeared far away from their weaving, paused. Material whispered, "A thread trembles." Lysis frowned, and Atropos, whose shears by no means hesitated, set them down. They listened. The song did no longer demand worship. It did no longer beg to be loved. It definitely discovered the entirety. While the very last note dwindled, even the cave refused to echo it. As though the world knew to copy it would be a criminal offense. The gods waited. The muses waited. They anticipated Milanian to return to provide this surprise to the sector. But he did not. He concealed it. And in doing so, he set a one-of-a-kind song in motion, one in every of silence and results. While Milanian emerged from the cave, the arena felt smaller. The skies, as soon as so big, appeared faded beside the echoes of the tune nonetheless humming in his bones. People rushed to greet him, musicians, poets, even clergymen. They begged to hear what he had written, to sense something electricity had moved the heavens. But Milanian said nothing. They asked again. He smiled faintly. Not but. Handiest the muses noticed the shift. They got here to him one nightfall, stepping from starlight like breath from a lyre. Their gowns glowed with proposal, however their eyes held caution. You had been selected to hold beauty, stated Arado, soft and sorrowful. However, beauty isn't intended to be buried, brought Cleo. You need to sing it, whispered Calliope. Milanian bowed his head. I will not see it cheapened. They flinched as though he'd struck them. You watched mortals unworthy? Terpsy asked, voice trembling. You believe you studied you by myself are its dad or mum? He met their eyes, now not with rage, but with something less warm. Possession. Yes. Silence felt like iciness between them. Then you are not ours, said Calliope. Now not due to the fact you created something past us, however because you hoard it. He stated not anything and they vanished. Nonetheless the gods waited. Even Zeus, who hardly ever worried himself with mortal affairs, paused his thunder to concentrate. Even Hades tilted his head within the depths. They waited for an unmarried word, a whisper, a fragment. Nothing got here. Milanian kept the song locked inside himself. Not written, no longer recorded, no longer shared. He referred to as its sacred, however sacred matters, while sealed too long, start to bitter. He achieved other pieces. They had been still stunning. Audiences wept. Crowds cheered. However he knew, and so did the divine. Something was lacking. And worse, something had been stolen. The tune that could stir the fates, bend time, and touch the gods themselves, was buried beneath his delight. He told himself he blanketed it. However, the muses, watching from afar, noticed the fact. He had chained the divine to his ego, and the gods who undergo madness, struggle, and worship without blinking do not abide robbery. And so one night time the wind turned still. The celebrities went quiet, and a curse started to bloom. No longer with fireplace, however with reminiscence. The curse came softly. No thunder, no divine wrath from Olympus, just a dream. Milanian lay beneath an open sky, cradled inside the identical silence he had once precious. Sleep pulled him gently into darkness, and their waiting turned into the track, the final song. It returned, clearer, richer, impossibly perfect. He heard notes he'd in no way written, harmonies he hadn't yet imagined. It lifted him via stars, him into oceans, unspooled the very material of which means. He wept in joy, in awe, in surrender, after which morning gone, now not diminished, erased. No memory, no longer a word, no longer a call. The melody he'd written with his soul, felt in his bones, became long past like mist at dawn. Before everything he thought it a cruel trick of sleep. He grabbed his lyre and tried to take into account even an unmarried development. Not anything. He strummed wildly, off-key, frantic, nothing. That night, he again to his mattress early, coronary heart pounding, and the tune returned, extra radiant than ever. He sang alongside within the dream, tears streaming, arms dancing through light, felt real. He may want to consider it inside the dream, but all over again, with dawn's first breath gone. Milanian started out maintaining candles lit through the night, scribbling notes inside the darkish. He begged his mind to keep a phrase, a rhythm, a single picture, but regardless of what he tried, it vanished over and over and once more. He stopped gambling, refused to carry out. Crowds diminished, buddies left. His domestic grew dusty and bloodless, but none of it mattered. He had one obsession now. Consider the track. The muses stood at a distance, watching with sorrow. He changed into given a present, said Otterpie, and he chose to cage it. Now he is the best one that will hear it, stated Polyhymnia. And in no way don't forget, whispered Cleo. It become not vengeance, it was balance. Milanian would pay attention the music every night for eternity. However, it would live simplest in goals. Every sunrise, it might slip through his grasp like water through cracked arms. He would never prevent chasing it, never forestall hoping. And in time, wish could rot into madness. Due to the fact what torments a bard more than forgetting the best music he ever knew, and knowing it nonetheless sings without him. Milanian stopped counting the nights. They bled into every different and limitless loop of ecstasy and loss. Each nighttime he slipped into desires where the very last track embraced him like a lover back from struggle. And every sunrise he woke by myself, screaming, weeping clean. Before everything he tried to outweat the curse. He employed scribes to sleep beside him, begged seers to extract fragments from his thoughts. He sang to mirrors, hoping his own voice could betray a few hidden reminiscences. Not anything labored, and slowly he started out to fray. He stopped eating. His robes hung from a body long gone whole. His palms trembled when he reached for his lyre, the identical device he once cradled like a toddler. Strings snapped below his shaking fingers. He did not fix them. He failed to want them anymore, because in sleep the tune nonetheless came. It had become his simplest reason, the simplest location he felt whole. And waking became a punishment. He cursed the sun, smashed his windows, sealed himself in a room without a light. But nevertheless the song left with the morning. When he emerged, he not resembled a bard. He turned into wildeed, gaunt. His as soon as golden voice now roar from nights of determined humming. He wandered from village to village like a beggar, now not for coin, but for reminiscence. Have you ever heard it? He'd requested strangers. The music without a beginning and no cease. Have you ever heard it on your sleep? People pied him at the start, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fled. He started out to sing fragments inside the streets, random, frantic bursts of melody. They made no sense to others. However, to him they were clues, keys, pieces of a shattered replicate he should almost reassemble. However, each time it slipped through his palms. He laughed while he failed, then cried, then laughed once more. And each night time the tune came back, shimmering, complete, just out of reach. The muses watched, not with anger, with mourning. He had once been their finest vessel. Now he became a cracked jar, overflowing most effective while no one ought to hear. And in that descent, the track he'd hoarded became the factor that unraveled him. No longer with fire, not with wrath, however with silence. Melanian no longer lived within the world. His body walked through it. Yes, but his mind turned into elsewhere, caught between dreams and daylight hours, beyond and gift. A song handiest he may want to listen, and only when it turned into too overdue to keep. He wandered barefoot through cities that after hosted him like royalty. Kids who once sat at his FT now ran from his shadow. His call as soon as sung in reward have become a caution. Don't emerge as like Melanian. He slept wherein he ought to, under bushes, in empty chapels, now and again inside the doors of inns whose keepers as soon as begged for his presence. He no longer requested for food, handiest an area to relaxation, simplest the dream. The curse in no way failed. Every night time he fell asleep with trembling wish, and the final music back, entire, alive, an ideal ghost, and each morning he woke to forgetting. The cruelty wasn't within the silence. It become within the memory of sound. He remembered that he had heard something transcendent, that it had intended the whole lot, but he could no longer remember why. He commenced speak me to shadows, to timber, to the celebs. On occasion he might sing to strangers and demand they sing lower back, convinced the melody was hiding in a person else's throat. As soon as he believed an infant had hummed it in passing, he followed the family across 2 villages before collapsing inside the dust, begging the boy to sing once more. But the sound had been something else, something ordinary. He wept for hours, and still every night the music returned taunting, embracing, divine. He tried to hum it as he dreamed, tried to wake mid-melody. However, the curse become clever. He couldn't circulate within the dream. He could not file it, write it, bring it, handiest pay attention it. And while he woke, vacancy. Some who saw him stated he nevertheless hummed in his sleep, that if you located your ear close to his mouth at nighttime, you could pay attention to music in contrast to some other. But only then, handiest in darkness. The muses no longer got here. The gods stopped looking, and Melanian, once the voice of the sector, now wandered like an echo of a song the sector could now not bear in mind, and he should no longer neglect. Melanian had grown skinny as twilight. His pores and skin, as soon as kissed by means of golden mild, turned into now pale and paper thin. His voice, what remained of it, become horsero from years of whispers and wandering. He now not looked for meals, shelter, or even the track. He absolutely walked. One nighttime he reached a cliff overlooking the ocean. It became quiet there. No towns, no roads, no curious eyes. Simply the wind, the waves, and the celebrities slowly rising within the deepening blue. He sat curled in opposition to a stone, the sea breeze tangling what remained of his hair. He did not weep. He did not sing. He genuinely closed his eyes, and the dream got here once more. But this time, something became extraordinary. There was no postpone, no mist to wade through, no struggle to hear. The very last music become there from the beginning, complete and clean. But it became now not just sound. It become a place, a presence, a world constructed from track. Melanian stood within it, barefoot on chords that bent like grass, stars pulsing above in rhythm. The sky became a symphony. The wind sang in concord, and he turned into no longer just hearing it. He become a part of it. His very own voice joined the track, and it did now not tremble. It did no longer forget about. It soared. He noticed each word he had misplaced. Each word he'd mourned. But now he understood. The tune had never left him. It had grown without him. It had become extra than his fingers may want to maintain. He become not its proprietor. He changed into its witness. And in that very last dream, there was no sorrow, no shame, no punishment. Best launch. While the solar rose, Melanian did not stir. The wind lifted softly around his body as if carrying away a very last breath. A shepherd passing the cliffs discovered him later, non-violent, hands resting on his chest, as though cradling an invisible lyre. There was no scroll, no recording. However, above him, excessive inside the coastal sky, seabirds flew in bizarre formations, almost like they danced to something simplest they may listen. And the ocean for a second sang, now not in words, now not in melody, however in something older than either, something he had ultimately become. Millennium was buried under a lone olive tree near the cliff wherein he remaining slept. No priest executed the rites.
No crowd se crud.
Simply the shepherd who determined him and a few villagers who remembered the testimonies. Faint echoes of the bard who once made the gods pause mid-breath. There was no monument, simplest silence. But silence has a way of amplifying truth. Inside the years that followed, peculiar matters had been whispered across the land. Travelers claimed that if you exceeded that cliff underneath a brand new moon, you would possibly hear a melody in the wind. Quick, fleeting, heartbreakingly stunning. No longer a full music, only a notice, simply sufficient to make you stop. Kids began dreaming of tune they'd by no means heard. Musicians would wake within the night with tears on their cheeks and no reminiscence of why. And sometimes whilst a bard sat by myself at dusk and not using a target market, a sudden chord could shape under their hands. Something no longer theirs, something best. They never remembered it through mourning. The musers stated not anything. They did not curse another bard. They did not reclaim the song because they understood what Millennium had grown to be. No longer a caution, not a hero, however a vessel grew to become legend. A soul whose punishment became born no longer of cruelty but of refusal, and whose redemption got here now not through sharing but surrender. The very last track became never written down. It became never completed in amphitheaters or temples. It does no longer exist in scroll or scripture, but it lives within the quiet moments between sleep and waking, within the hush before a performer strums their first chord, within the way the ocean sounds specific while you're grieving. Millennium track have become a part of the arena itself, now not to be remembered, however to be felt. A whisper in the bones, a melody without phrases, and those who feel it even for a second, by no means neglect the silence that follows. They say in case you stand on my own at the right cliff on the right night with no one watching and the wind is kind, you might listen a sound that does not belong to this world. Just a fragment, just a breath. And perhaps if you listen carefully enough, you will sooner or later recognize why Millennium in no way permitted cross.